Hello everyone, this is Professor Al Mary, your instructor in Political Science 2030, and welcome back. As always, it's a pleasure to have you. Today we'll be talking about California state government, specifically the plural executive system of California government. That means California, unlike the federal system, doesn't have a single executive, but multiple executives, nearly all of them independently elected. But first, let's discuss the objectives of the supplemental lecture. As you know, and I've mentioned previously, the textbook does not cover California government at all. I would have had to order a separate book, but that would be, given the circumstances that we have, would have been exceedingly cumbersome. And so what I've done is to extract and focus on the three branches of state government, and then in a comparative sort of way discuss the three branches of national government with state government. Let me also say that, as I previously mentioned, it is a requirement to learn about basic aspects of California government, not just federal government. So we shall focus on the three branches of California government. Last week, you recall, we covered the California legislature with Congress and tried to draw some comparisons and try to make some contrast between the legislative institutions at the state and federal level. Well, this week we shall examine the California executive branch in contrast to some extent with the presidency, but I've covered that in a separate lecture in part one of this lecture. So I urge you to view that one as well. And then next week we shall discuss the federal and state judiciaries in pretty much the same context. Let me remind you that I have a very short PDF document on California government posted on Blackboard. And covers the three branches of government, and I urge you to review that PDF document as well. Now, the California government, or executive branch of the California government, is generally described as a plural executive, and that's because it is an executive branch, unlike the federal executive branch, headed by a single president, or headed, or the powers of the executive branch vested in the presidency, the office of the presidency. Here you have plural executives, or multiple executive branches or executive offices in which the persons leading them are independently elected executives. In other words, they're not appointed by the governor, as would be the case by the U.S. president, but they run for these offices on their own. And as a result, they are accountable directly to the voters and depend on their tenure in office on the will of the people, as well as the applicable constitutional provisions which they must discharge as part of that. So you have a plural executive system. Only Maine, New Hampshire, and New Jersey have a unitary executive, in other words, similar to the federal system. And so in the California plural executive, we have the governor at the top, of course, who runs for the governor's office, and he or she may win that. But the lieutenant governor is not the equivalent of the vice president of the United States, so they're not on the same ticket. It is conceivable that you could have a lieutenant governor of one party and a governor from another party. The third high-ranking state official, executive official, would be the Attorney General, and we'll look at the powers and responsibilities of these offices in subsequent PowerPoints. Then you have the State Controller, again another elective office. The State Treasurer, the Secretary of State, the Insurance Commissioner, the State Superintendent of Public Instruction, and State Board of Equalization. So all of these executive positions are constitutional positions, and individuals running for these offices run independently and do not rely on either the governor's political will or approval for their tenure in office. Just as a quick introduction of our current occupants of state office, our governor is Gavin Newsom. He's a Democrat. Lieutenant Governor is Ellen Kounalakis. She's also a Democrat. Eleni, I should say. And the Attorney General is Javier Becerra. Secretary of State is Alex Padilla. And the Controller is Betty Yee. Treasurer Fiona Ma. Insurance Commissioner Ricardo Lara. And Superintendent of Instruction Tony Thurman. As you notice here, they're all Democrats. It seems like California state government is dominated heavily by Democrats. Again, I omitted the insurance commissioner, who is a Republican. Now, the governor has a variety of executive powers, and we'll look at them in subsequent slides. But as part of his direct constitutional executive powers include power that of commander-in-chief. Again, not commander-in-chief in the same way as the U.S. president, who is commander-in-chief over all the armed forces. Here, the governor is commander-in-chief over the California National Guard, which, of course, is also part of the armed forces of the United States. But the commander-in-chief powers is delegated to the governor, and we'll see in subsequent slides how the governor exercises this particular power. As the chief executive officer, of course, he's in charge of all law enforcement, meaning that just like the U.S. president is ultimately responsible for the enforcement of laws passed by Congress, so is the governor for laws passed by the state legislature. He exercises the power of executive clemency, similar to the presidential power of pardon, but not as unqualified as unextensive, but we'll also take a look at that subsequently. And he has the power of extradition, which we discussed previously. That is the requirement that a person who is a fugitive from justice must be returned to the state where the alleged crime has occurred. You recall that is provided for in Article 4 of the U.S. Constitution. Beyond executive powers, the governor also has appointment powers, and appointment of administrative officers, commissioners, judicial officers, and other political appointees. So the California governor is one of the most powerful people in the nation, California being the largest, the state with the largest population, and probably some would say, the seventh largest world economy if California were a country. And so you can easily imagine that the California governor is, as they would say, primus inter pares, first among equals. So of all the governors, the California governor is regarded as first and foremost. And indicated earlier, his powers include a variety of areas, which include the annual budgeting process, the appointment of executive and judicial officers, a sort of legislative function of signing or vetoing legislation, deciding on clemency for convicted criminals, and emergency powers, along with a variety of other ceremonial activities. Here you can see the organizational chart of the state government. As you can see at the very top, you see those independent executive offices. To the far left is the state superintendent of public instruction, followed by the insurance commissioner, secretary of state, lieutenant governor. And then to the far right, you have the governor, of course, elected, ultimately accountable to the people or the voters of California. You can see the executive offices are separate islands unto themselves. They're not connected to the governor's office, but they stand on their own and they have their own constitutional mandates. And so, as you can see, the state superintendent of public instruction consists of the California Department of Education, the Board of Community Governors of Community Colleges, and so forth. And then under the governor's office, you can see the various boards and commissions, including the California State Board of Education, Student Aid Commission, University of California, and Cal State itself comes directly under the members are appointed by the governor, although as you'll note from the chart that they're not accountable directly to the governor. They're, as it were, independent bodies. And then, of course, below that, the executive officers that are directly accountable to the governor are the ones that he appoints, which would be midpoint in this chart: Secretary of Business and Transportation, Department of Corrections, Secretary of Education, Environmental Protection, Finance, and Food and Agriculture. Of course, below them are different sub-agencies and sub-departments. As you can see, continuing with that chart, you'll see that this is Chief of Staff. That would be Chief of Staff for the governor. And you can see a number of offices under the Chief of Staff, beginning with accounting to special advisors to press secretary, including also the First Lady's office. And then under the Chief of Staff, as you can see, there are a variety of administrative offices, along with the other agencies that are directly accountable to the governor, including Secretary of Health and so on. So as you can see, it's a pretty complex kind of organization with many areas of responsibilities and structures of accountability. Now, some of the roles and duties and so forth of the California governor. The governor, of course, has the constitutional duty of enforcing state laws through a vast administrative bureaucracy consisting of about 50 departments, which we saw in the previous slide charts. These agencies are divided into 5 principal policy areas. Again, you've seen them in the charts, but they include business, transportation and housing, health and welfare resources, state consumer services, and youth and adult corrections. That's sort of the basic structure of state government. Then the government has his cabinet. These are just like the president has his cabinets with the various departments, such as Department of State, Department of Defense, Department of Commerce, Department of Labor, and so forth. And California governor has a similar cabinet with the directors of the Department of Finance, Food and Agriculture, Industrial Relations, Trade and Commerce, Environmental Protection, and Information Technology. So the director of finance is a very important position because it is the director of finance that prepares the entire state budget for submission to the legislature. Mentioned the governor as commander-in-chief. As I said, the commander-in-chief only to the extent that the governor is oversees the deployment of California National Guard, which are oftentimes called into active duty when there are in-state emergencies, such as earthquakes or floods or major fires or riots or things of that sort. Unlike the President of the United States, the Governor of California does not have the power to authorize deployment of troops inside the country or outside the country, or even inside the country for purposes other than emergency types of situations, but still regarded as the Commander-in-Chief. Of course, the National Guard is part of the Armed Forces of the United States, and so they are also subject to the authority of the President of the United States. As part of this Commander-in-Chief powers also, it's not only the California National Guard that the governor may call into service when necessary, but also the California Highway Patrol, oftentimes to bolster local police and sheriff's officers. So when there is a state of emergency or a situation in which local police or county sheriff cannot handle, the governor can direct CHP to provide assistance, usually for a limited period of time. Now, one of the important powers of the governor, of course, is the power of appointment. You recall the President of the United States also has appointment powers. President appoints federal judges and other political appointments. By appointment, we mean he submits the names to the Senate, which will provide advice and consent. In other words, they will confirm or reject the appointees. So in the same manner, the California governor has appointment powers for a bunch of administrative boards, including the University of California Board of Regents, the California State Board of Trustees, the Board of Governors of California Community Colleges, and so on. So these are the governing boards or the governing bodies of higher educational institutions in California. And so when there is a vacancy on any of these boards, it is the power of the governor to make appointments for replacements. Another appointment power that the governor has is on the High-Speed Rail Authority, and that is the 800-mile high-speed rail system, which is underway to connect all major California cities. Another very important commission is the Public Utilities Commission, and the governor makes appointments to that commission as well. This commission is very important because it regulates the rates charged for services, for gas services, water services, telephone, telegraph, electricity, and other transportation industries. Because most of these services operate as monopolies, in return for operating as monopolies, they are subject to state regulation, and they're regulated by these commissions, which operate independently. But the appointment of commissioners to these bodies is the governor's. There's the Energy Commission, again, to which the governor can make an appointment, and this commission coordinates energy, studies energy needs in the state, and coordinates resources, as well as conservation and promoting alternative technologies. The Fair Employment and Housing Commission is that commission that enforces laws against both job and housing discrimination, and those commissioners are also appointed by the governor. The Unemployment Insurance Appeals Board reviews appeals regarding unemployment and disability claims, and members of that board are also appointed by the governor. With respect to the granting of parole from state prisons, in other words, state prisoners or convicts leaving prison early on parole, their cases are reviewed by the Board of Parole Hearings, whether or not they present a threat to the community and other factors, and the governor appoints members to the parole board as well. And the Agricultural Relations, Labor Relations Board guarantees justice for California agricultural workers and stability in labor relations, and appointment to that board is also made by the governor. And lastly, the California Coastal Commission, which has the very important duty of protecting the coastline for public access, is also appointed by the governor. Just a chart here, and give you a quick overview when there are vacant positions, including vacancies in federal offices. So if there are vacancies in state judicial positions, so the appeals court and Supreme Court, the governor would appoint, and then the confirmation of the governor would have to be made separately by the Commission on Judicial Appointments, which basically reviews the judicial fitness and competence and their record and experience and whether or not they are fit to be state Supreme Court or appellate court justices, those kinds of appointments. But just the lower court, the Superior Court, the government will make the appointment because since judicial offices in California are elected offices, the government will make an appointment until the next election, and then that judge will have to run for office again. U.S. Senate, again, the governor, if there's a vacancy in a U.S. Senate seat, the governor will make the appointment, and at the next election, there will be a replacement. Same thing with the county supervisor and the governor's personal staff. However, with respect to his cabinet, the ones that we discussed, those 6 agencies, the governor will submit the appointments for confirmation by the state senate, which generally will approve and very rarely reject a gubernatorial appointment. Same thing with the executive departments and the boards and commissions, as well as other constitutional officers. Now, let's talk a little bit about the clemency powers of the California governor in much the same way as the presidential pardon powers we discussed in the first part of the supplemental lecture. The California governor also has similar powers, and the governor's clemency powers include the power to pardon, commutations, which are basically reductions of sentences, and reprieves, principally postponement of sentences, granted to convicts. So if a person is scheduled to be executed on a certain date, the governor can grant reprieve, postpone that date for additional legal review or whatever the reasons may be. And when the governor grants pardons, usually there is a process through which the pardon applications go through, and then the pardon process will make a recommendation to the governor whether or not to grant it. Generally speaking, the governor doesn't exercise pardon and commutation powers very freely, only in exceptional and meritorious circumstances. One of the powers of the governor is to change a death sentence into a life sentence. So it doesn't happen very much, but a person who's been sentenced to death could be, that person's life could be spared if the governor commutes that sentence into a life sentence, that death sentence into a life sentence, even though the person was convicted in court and with a recommendation of a death sentence by a jury. It doesn't happen a lot, but it is one of the powers of the governor. We talked about the quasi-legislative powers of the president, and here the California governor has similar quasi-legislative powers, and in that, just the same as the U.S. president, the California governor provides an annual State of the State address, talks about what the current situation is in the state, and then talks about his vision and plans for the coming year. The governor also has the power to call the legislature into special sessions. Since the California legislature is a full-time session, it goes on based on its own calendar and schedules. It doesn't stop. And the only way the legislature can be stopped externally and allowed to have to consider alternative measures or new measures is if the governor calls a special session and has the state legislature consider a piece of legislation or a bill outside the normal process. The governor, of course, has veto powers, in much the same way as the president, except in some of the in the ways that the veto is exercised. It is a bit different. So after a bill is passed, the governor will have 10 days to sign or veto the bill, and if he takes no action, then the bill becomes law automatically, which is different from the national system. The exception is when the legislature goes into recess or adjourns, and hundreds of bills may arrive in just a few days, then you'd have 30 days to act on a piece of legislation. The governor has the principal responsibility of preparing the state budget, which is the amount of money that will be needed to run the state government. And that budget is prepared and submitted to the state legislature. And there are limits on the governor's discretion in cases involving federal grants and mandates, entitlements, and earmarking. But in general, it's the responsibility of the governor to undertake the financial management of the state. The lieutenant governor, as I said, is not the equivalent of the vice president of the United States. The lieutenant governor is a separately elected office and plays some similar roles, at least to the extent that the lieutenant governor is the sort of formal ceremonial presiding officer of the state senate without any real power as such. But to the extent that the lieutenant governor's office exercises certain kinds of powers. The governor is an ex officio member of the State Lands Commission, the UC Regents, and the CSU Board of Trustees. So, by virtue of the fact of occupying that office, they're members of these boards and trustees. The lieutenant governor succeeds to the governorship if that office becomes vacant between elections. So if there should be a recall or a resignation or a death in the governor's office, then the lieutenant governor could serve as an acting governor until the next election. Also, if the governor is not in the state, maybe traveling abroad or somewhere else, the lieutenant governor serves as acting governor with full powers of the governor, including the power to sign legislation if the opportunity arises. As I indicated, oftentimes the elected governor and the lieutenant governor may or may not be from the same party, but it is quite likely that they could be from two different parties. The governor's this kind of executive arrangement has been criticized for promoting inefficiency and poor communication between public officials, because these offices tend to be independent, and to the extent that there is really no compulsion for them to work together, they operate in their own spheres and domains. Perhaps the third most important officer in state government is the Attorney General. The Attorney General is the chief counsel and prosecutor for the state. So on all legal matters involving the state, it's the Attorney General's office that provides legal advice and representation, and in matters of state criminal prosecution for violation of state law, and when local district attorney's offices cannot manage because of conflict or some other reason, it is the state attorney general's office that takes over. The chief function of the attorney general, of course, is to ensure that all state laws are observed, and when they're not observed, to take appropriate legal action to seek enforcement. And among its powers, among the powers of the Attorney General include authority over local law enforcement, and so local district attorney's office and local police officers and so on are ultimately accountable to the state Attorney General. One of the interesting things that the Attorney General, the State Attorney General, does is um, um, the Attorney General's office issues what are called advisory opinions on constitutional issues before the state Supreme Court. So these advisory opinions are, as the phrase suggests, advisory. They're not binding, but they do provide a certain degree of legal certainty if there is a question of law that is not certain. And until a definitive decision is made on that issue by the state courts or the state Supreme Court, the advisory opinions of the Attorney General are often relied upon as authoritative sources of law. The AG's office provides summaries and titles for state ballot measures. Those are the initiatives that we talked about, such as Prop 22, and then also serves on the Commission on Judicial Appointments, which you mentioned earlier. If there are vacancies or appointments to be made on the state Supreme Court or appellate courts, then the governor will nominate the individual for the bench, and then the Commission on Judicial Appointments will approve or disapprove. Again, the Attorney General is the chief legal advisor to all state agencies, so if there is a question of law for any state agency, they can get free advice from the Attorney General's office, and ultimately also representation if they should be embroiled in some kind of legal problem. Attorney General is the head of the State Justice Department and provides assistance to law enforcement agencies, represents the state in civil lawsuits as well, not just simply in criminal matters, and supervises county district attorneys in criminal cases. The Controller of the State of California is responsible for state fiscal control, financial control, tax administration, and local fiscal matters and administration. The Controller is a member of the State Lands Commission, the Franchise Tax Board, and Board of Equalization. And the central role of the Controller is concerned with government finance, to audit state expenditures, supervise financial restrictions on local governments, influence state collections as member of the State Board of Equalization. As the title suggests, it is basically controlling the finances of the state. The Controller has considerable patronage power in appointing certain kinds of offices, such as tax appraisers, and as a member of the State Land Commission, oversees over 4 million areas of public lands, and chairs the Franchise Tax Board, which basically collects state income taxes. The Treasurer of the State of California collects, deposits state funds, and sells bonds, basically the state investor. The State Treasurer maintains custody over tax money collected by various states, deposits them in private banks until they are appropriated by the state legislature. It will also sell government bonds and uses whatever public employee funds and pension funds there are, and tries to basically make good and wise investments using state funds and state tax dollars. The Secretary of State, unlike the Secretary of State of the United States, which deals with matters of foreign policy and so on, the State Secretary of State manages state elections, serves as the chief state record keeper, and maintains official custody over the state's legal documents. If you want to incorporate a business, that's where you would go, to the Office of the Secretary of State, to get incorporated and to get business licenses. Among its important functions are, of course, the administration of state election procedures. It sets elections, enforces applicable laws and rules, verifies signatures on petitions for ballot initiatives and referendums and recalls, and overall administers the state's election laws. The Superintendent of Public Instruction is a nonpartisan elected office. It's basically the head of the State Department of Education, and controls with the Board of Education, which is appointed by the governor, 1/3 of all state expenditures. And one of the principal areas of state expenditure is education. The Office of Superintendent sets policies for school districts, including textbook adoptions, child care centers, handicap and disadvantaged persons, educational programs, and other similar educational activities. It is an elected office on a nonpartisan basis. In other words, the person does not have to declare they are Republican or Democrat, and the idea, of course, is that education should not be politicized. And the superintendent directs the State Department of Education and dispenses financial aid to local school districts. And most importantly, also, it grants teaching credentials and enforces policies determined by the State Board of Education. Then we have the California State Insurance Commissioner. It's one of the newer offices created in 1998. Because of concerns and complaints about increasing insurance rates and problems getting proper insurance compensation and things of that sort. So this commissioner's office is responsible for regulating all insurance businesses in California. In addition, the insurance commissioner's office monitors corporations that sell various types of insurance, including life, health, automobile, homeowner, and earthquakes. And part of that monitoring also determines whether rate hikes are appropriate and the extent to which they could be increased. And so it tries to create a more stable and fair insurance environment for consumers in the state of California. The Board of Equalization is the public agency charged with tax administration and fee collection. And it administers and collects state and local taxes and uses those taxes, including excise tax, gasoline, alcohol, and cigarettes, and so forth. Provides a tax base for the state. There are 4 elected members representing districts of equal populations in the state. In addition to collecting taxes, the Board of Equalization reviews county tax assessments and procedures, and is responsible for maintaining equal assessment to market value ratios among counties, and so try to create some degree of homogeneity in the tax structure throughout the state. It also assesses the property of railroads and public utilities. This concludes the supplemental lecture, part 2, California government, specifically the plural executive or the executive branch of California government. Please review the PDF material I posted on Blackboard. You'll find a bit more detail than what I have provided you here, but keep in mind, because of the sheer volume of material, I will be focusing on the major aspects of California state government for examination purposes. Have a safe and pleasant Thanksgiving Day. Until next time, stay well and take care.